So we're working very hard in conjunction with FEMA, the Corps of Engineers, private contractors, but ultimately with local governments to make sure that this debris gets cleaned up. But let me just say that as you look at these numbers, and they will continue to grow, hopefully some of the most important ones on here, like fatalities, won't. But some of these other numbers will continue to grow. Is that behind each of these numbers represents an individual, human being, citizen in our state. And as the governor has challenged us many times over the past 44 days, 45 days, is to not get caught up in the numbers and to not get caught up in the disaster, and to make sure that we every day strive to make sure that we are ultimately doing what we need to do, and that is helping our individual citizens and our local governments. So where do we go from here? The road ahead. I think that we take some of the experiences of the past, some of the innovative and creative ideas of the present, and we ultimately rebuild the state of Alabama in a way that is much better than we would have ever thought that it could be, because ultimately that's what we owe to our citizens. Because, by the way, all of this money that's paying for it is theirs. Every penny of it came from them. And so we owe it to them. So what are our issues that we will be looking at for the long-term recovery of the state? Well, as I mentioned, debris. We'll make sure that we get it removed and disposed of properly. One of the things that we have had the unique privilege of participating in is a pilot project called Operation Clean Sweep. I think that they did that because I have some of the best public assistance staff in the country that knows the regulations as well as any federal employee, and most of the people in Washington, and I think that they wanted to give them a challenge. So they threw out Operation Clean Sweep. And we've worked very hard, my staff, the governor, the people with FEMA that are here on the ground, which had never really dealt with anything like Operation Clean Sweep, to go in and make sure that it was the maximum benefit to the citizens and to the local governments. So Operation Clean Sweep dealt with debris on private property. Because to be honest with you, I'm sort of like the mayor. I'd never heard of a leaner, a hanger, or a straggler, which is obviously something that's a big deal to some of these contractors and some of these in the Corps of Engineers and the others world. But you know, we're dealing with those. But as the governor stated, the reason this was priority number one is because this was the only way getting this debris removed from private property that we could get people back in long-term temporary housing and allow them to begin to rebuild their lives. Which led us into the next phase, our housing needs. As the mayor stated, they just closed the last shelter here last Friday. We have citizens throughout the state that have been placed in rentals and leases. Some have been placed in temporary FEMA housing units. And we're looking at every option available to be able to ultimately allow the citizens to go back and to rebuild permanent structures. Not only will we be working those housing needs, but as the governor stated, we have some 18 schools that have been seriously damaged or destroyed. And we're also working with them to be able to make, with the school systems, to be able to make sure that our kids can start back to school on time in August, probably much to their dismay. A couple of the things that the governor has done, and more information will be coming out about, is long-term disaster recovery. I think that we learned a lot of lessons on how we could do it better after some major disasters in the last decade, and the governor will be setting up a task force that will tackle long-term disaster recovery, made up of state, private corporations, and other partners to make sure that we work to assist the locals governments in long-term recovery. One of the key things of that is participation from the private partners and public partnership sector of government and of individual corporations. Because ultimately what we have to make sure of is that as the government has come in to help, our insurance has played a role that we are there to help find a way to bridge the gaps in places where they've been bridged or need to be bridged. So we will be also working with volunteer and faith-based organizations to make sure that everybody that's out there is getting the assistance that they need to help them rebuild a permanent foundation. And then lastly will be the hazard mitigation program. And we'll focus on that over the next couple of hours in detail. There will be dollars that will be available to rebuild and to lessen the effects of future disasters in this state. The hazard mitigation program has been around and been under some other names, but it was started in the middle 90s by a previous FEMA director. And it has evolved into the program that it is today. It's going to take the help of state and local government and these private-public partnerships from individual companies to make sure that we can utilize those dollars and have match money to be able to match those dollars to be able to come back and rebuild Alabama safer and better. A couple of the initiatives that we have spoken with the governor about, and as he mentioned earlier, are our schools. There'll be a requirement for the schools that will be rebuilt to rebuild back to a standard set by FEMA to make sure that they are safe for our kids. We will also be looking at safe rooms and safe shelters, either community or individual. And we'll be working with the local governments that wish to participate in those programs in their counties to work with individuals to be able to have access to those opportunities. And then as the governor stated, there'll be other projects that we will look at on making sure that we are looking at other areas where we ultimately need to make sure that we are prepared and are ready and are safe from future disasters, whether they be hurricanes or tornadoes or floods or whatever may hit the state. So as we move through the remainder of the day, we'll talk about some of those programs, with the hazard mitigation program being one key issue that will help us to be able to mitigate the effects of those future disasters.